Back with another episode, Come Correct Podcast. I'm here with Jordan Shallow, Dr. Jordan Shallow, the Muscle Doc on Instagram. How you doing, man?
Good, man. Good to see you.
So let's get right into it. I'm fascinated with the amount of people that you've worked with and some of the people that you have worked with, and it seems like the breadth of what you do is what's fascinating. So I guess to point this in a question, if you could name drop.
Oh, that's where we're gonna start?
I know. I know it's like so cringy because it's kind of like you're. Oh, I've worked with this guy, but it is interesting. Like, for instance, Andrew Schultz is a really interesting one. Can you tell us about that? So
Schultz actually started in this building. So the impetus to getting to meet and then working with Andrew and Akash and Mark, and basically everyone on like the Flagrant team was they moved down here during COVID. And Hayden Bow, whose studio we're currently using, thank you, Hayden, had just bought a new Cafe Racer, like old BMW motorcycle. He's parked it out front of a coffee shop, and he took a video of these four guys like kind of around his bike, was worried that they were going to like just rip it off, and didn't realize until after that who he was recording. And these four guys came in, saw his helmet, started talking to him, and he didn't realize until after he left that who they were. They had just moved down from New York to record the podcast in Miami. It was Schultz, Akash, Mark, and Dove.
No way.
So I was staying at Hayden's place, and he comes back and he shows me the video. I was like, no way. I listen to that podcast all the time. I'm like, yo, send me the video. I'll post it, pretending like I was there. I'll tag you and them in it, so you guys will connect. And he's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, dude, I don't give a like, send it to me. Send it. I posted on Instagram. And I tagged like the Flagrant podcast. I didn't know Schultz at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, I knew who he was from just his online presence and his comedy. So I tagged all of them, and I tagged Hayden, like, looking at Hayden's bike or whatever. I was like, oh, perfect. They talked in the coffee shop. Now they'll be able to connect, see Hayden like owns his gym and all that. And like, honestly, less than 2 minutes later, Schultz just messaged me and was like, hey man, I'm looking for a trainer. I'm trying to get in shape. And I was like, yeah, dude, let's talk. Monday morning, this address, 9 a.m. And that was it. We came in and we kind of talked a little bit and
got to training.
How
was he? Was he a beast or what?
So yeah, it's so interesting because I ended up training Akash. I still work with Mark, and I trained Andrew, and they couldn't be more different. Like Schultz is very like, he does great in like boot camp like settings. Like he wants to be able to not breathe. Like that's essentially, he just wants to work really, really hard.
Yep.
Like anything that just keeps his heart rate going, because he's like a very cerebral thinker. Like, you know, Schultz is the type of guy that'll stay up to 3 a.m. practicing walking out on stage. Like he's that level deep. Like he's very switched on in that regard.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when he trains, he doesn't want to think.
Right.
So like the first session, and can be somewhat cerebral in my approach to working out. Like I'm trying to explain a lot of things and like get buy-in that way. And then I realized very quickly, it's like, oh, like this dude he doesn't want to hear anything. He just wants someone to stand over him and just get his ass kicked. So we did that. And yeah, he's a dog. He's actually a really good boxer.
Oh, really?
So he has like a base of athleticism.
Yeah, he always has those little quips about fighting.
Yeah.
Like he does know quite a bit about it. He's not a casual.
Yeah, he can throw hands, man.
Yeah. So you currently work at House of Athlete.
Yep.
You're working with athletes, but so this is why it's like it's hard to derive at a question, because you're a chiropractor by trade.
Yep.
You're also a strong dude, so you could be a strength and conditioning coach if you wanted to. You could be like a bodybuilding coach. You could be a powerlifting coach even, and also a lot of like body work and physiotherapy, I imagine, goes along with it. When you work with someone, do they delineate what they want, or do you try and attack it from all facets, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, reverse engineer from the end goal. Like, and even like football players are probably my bread and butter at this point, especially working at HOA. But it's like, what is the end goal? Because football in itself is so many different sports. Like from like a technical perspective, an O lineman is completely different sport than a kicker versus a quarterback versus a safety. Like they're playing different games. It's the same game with a whole, but at the level of like the biomechanical level, which you're kind of making these assessments and hoping to make these improvements, they might as well be different sports, right? So then it's like, okay, well, what do you need to get better at in the sub game within the game that you play, right? Do you need to get faster? Do you need to jump higher? Do you need to be lighter? Do you just need to lose weight, which is oftentimes like a real simple rock to turn over that yields like a ton of benefit with athletes. So, and then once you dive down there, then it's like, all right, well, where are you at physically in relation to this end goal? And then based off of that proximity, how sophisticated of a method do we need to approach or apply rather to start to overcome the initial bottlenecks in working you towards that goal?
So what, in kind of legitimizing your role as someone with some sort of a knowledge base around all of these different things, what do you feel was like the missing piece, and how did you fill it? Like, do you have kind of like this overarching thesis on what's missed by a lot of people?
Yeah, I definitely have like a slant on things that might be a little bit different because I had like the clinical chiropractic background, but I also had like anecdotal experience of going through like the competitive ranks of like powerlifting and, you know, working on building muscle over the course of the last, I don't know, like 17-ish years I've been training. But then also like I was a strength and conditioning coach at Stanford University. So I have like that team realistic aspect of training as well. So I guess it depends on each sub-discipline. Like for like athleticism, I would say maybe there's one thing that I would probably say more than anything else is differentiating the stimulus between strength and stability. I think that's something that across the board, whether it's like general fitness population, trainers, strength and conditioning coaches at the NCAA or the pro level, bodybuilders, rehabilitation. I think that's one misnomer that a lot of people get tripped up with. So, you know, when we see people doing like cable external rotations to strengthen the rotator cuff, it's like, well, it's not that the muscle works a different way, but stability is more reactive muscle contraction at the level of the muscle, where when we're doing these strengthening drills of like the glutes or the spine or the shoulder, rotator cuff, serratus, whatever, if I'm doing like a cable external rotation, that muscle contraction started in my brain, which is strengthening, right? Insertion to origin. But if I have a kettlebell over my head and I'm kind of getting this like reactive contraction that's sort of like autonomic, that muscle contraction actually started at the level of the muscle itself. Right. So I call it like almost like a retrograde and anterograde contraction. So like an anterograde would be downstream from, you know, your brain, essentially your pre and primary motor cortex. But what stability actually comes from what's called like your muscle spindles, which is like a lot of people miss the boat when they look at muscles as sensory organs. I think when you can understand that muscles are sensory organs, you can start to see training in a different light, and under that light you start to see where my approach might differ across all disciplines. And really in its simplest form, it's really going to be the fact that strength is different than stability.
But it sounds like in general there's a major bias towards strength training, like, and when you could be a bodybuilder and you could work on stability, or you could, I mean, probably less so because they just literally care what you look like. It's not entirely performance based, but that's very interesting. The goal, let's say the goal is shoulder stability, because that might help with health, and people are just going at it through with a strength bias, with just like pumping blood in the area, right?
They like that strength is quantifiable, but a lot of what coaches and therapists do is exist in the realm of the subjective and the qualitative rather than the quantitative, right? Like something being heavier is an easier pat on the back for people to achieve than something looking and feeling better. But, you know, unless you're in the sport of powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, like heavier isn't necessarily the goal for a lot of people. It is more sensory based. Like it is like, I want to feel better. So whether it's pain management, even to a certain sense, hypertrophy, like, you know, stability is something that we need to find to produce force. In bodybuilding circles, a lot of times we just find that stability externally through the use of machines or more stable implements, like a cable, as opposed to like a barbell or a dumbbell, where there's more freedom of movement. So I think from a stability perspective, no matter which discipline we're talking about, it's really the understanding tenets of progression of stability as either a center of mass that's deviating or a base of support that's limiting, right? So that's how we progress an unstable stimulus.
I'm just, my mind is running through examples of this.
Okay.
And one of them is a push-up. The stability aspect of the push-up is where people get the biggest bang for the buck, I think. Because So obviously you get the hypertrophy and you do get strength, but you're limited by how much weight you can have on a push-up, unless you're adding weight. Let's just say the body weight push-up. But what I've seen people is just work on push-ups, and then their bench doesn't go up, but it's still strong. Yeah. And I think it's because they are getting some level of stability there, or some sort of support. And I also like to think about like a handstand hold. So you're saying like, I'm just kind of inverting basically a kettlebell hold. Yeah. There was a time in my own weightlifting practice where like handstands became easier, or handstands were actually directly benefiting my ability to jerk or split jerk. And that's really interesting. I've never really thought of it from that lens of a reactionary, like the muscles just kind of firing to support, and then creating that stability over time, rather than being like, okay, now we're going to create the support. Now we're going to create it. Now we're going to create it. It's kind of like here it is, and we're stabilizing. I love that idea.
Well, it'll limit your ability to find point B if it knows it's not going to be stable in point B. That's why a lot of people lack range of motion, right? So we kind of talk about like the A to B in an overhead movement. The reason people can't get into a B position or an overhead position is their body is uncertain, because stability kind of is created through a coefficient of structure and function, right? Where my arm's at my side, I don't notice a deficiency in range of motion because I'm not moving, but I don't have difficulty moving my arm and my scapula, in most cases, because my scapula and my humerus are very structurally stable, right? They have a lot of articulating surface area. But as I go in the overhead position, this is less structurally stable. Like if I wanted to dislocate George's shoulder, I would start chapter 1 by putting his arm here. Right now, there's compromise in structural stability. Now hit the function. So when I say function, I mean like muscles and tendons, structure, ligament, and bones. Now there's more of a demand of those active or reactive tissues to resist force. But if you can't even get into this position,
yes,
you won't be able to exert force into that position, right?
I've done this without thinking about the process behind it. It's amazing to me. So the first thing when I teach seminars, or when I want to teach anyone how to snatch, I teach them the bottom position of the snatch, which is just like a deep overhead squat. And so when we think about, there's two different facets to this. When we think about teaching people how to overhead squat, a lot of times we say, here's the overhead position. Here's you at a completely standing posture. Now we're going to figure out how we can get you into that position. And, almost always you see a deficiency in mobility. So what I started to do was actually stack plates and try to create tension from the deep squat position. And I tell them how challenging, like it's really challenging, right? Like trying to sit with your knees out and get in this position where your hip crease is noticeably below the knees, and then be able to manage around in there. And okay, so now imagine we have to free up our thoracic spine and put a barbell overhead. And what I do is I start that from a supported position in the bottom. I do not start it from standing, because it doesn't work. Yeah. And then that's how I build the overhead squat. I teach them what it is like in the end spot. I build that mobility in the end range. I don't even like calling it end range. I don't even know if that's the proper terminology, but I teach them where we're headed, and then I can reverse engineer how to get there. Yeah. And it's so interesting, because that is purely stability versus strength. Right? We could develop the strength it takes to get down into that range of motion, but we could do this much faster if we just went straight into stability.
And there's two parts to that. Like, I really like the way you worded it. Like, understanding where you're going is part of it. And in a more concentrated sense, stability is the marriage of that component of understanding where you're going, but also understanding where you are. And that's where the sensory component of muscle comes into play. Like, I like kettlebell bottom under press is a really good example of this. I can change the way someone executes an exercise, like the success factor of that, by putting them in front of a mirror. So if someone can't do a kettlebell bottom under press, I'll put them in front of a mirror, and a lot of times they can. Because they can compensate with the lacking stability and the sensory motor aspect of muscle with our predominant sensory organ, which is our eyes. Like, we're very visually dominant creatures, like peregrine falcons, snow owls, and human beings. This is our jam. I put a purple tennis ball on green grass. My Great Dane sits there and looks at me like, where the f did it go? Yeah. It's olfactory. It'll smell it. It'll figure it out. Yeah. But not as visually acute.
You have a Great Dane?
I do.
Oh,
you'll meet her.
Okay. Sorry.
So no, it's worth the sidebar for sure. Love dogs. But so like stability, this muscle spindle reflex is it relays to our brain at a faster transmission speed than any other sensory input, faster than pain, like 10 times faster than pain.
Whoa.
Yeah. So fast pain is pain is nociception. Slow pain, which is like a dull ache, 0.5 to, 2 meters per second, give or take. Fast pain, like put your hand on a stove, like, pull it away. You're like, like you don't even know if it's hot, but you perceive it after you've already gone through the act. Max speed of fast pain is like 20 meters per second. The stimulus of your brain or your muscle sending to the brain your position in space holding like a kettlebell overhead is 120 meters per second at minimum, 120 to 135. So it's 10 times faster than perception of pain. Our brain really wants to know where our body is, because knowing where you are is the prerequisite to being able to go somewhere.
Right. That's very interesting. If we could get back to your clients,
right?
Do you see a lot of them with that strength bias and lack of stability bias, and then all of a sudden all you have to do is fix the stability aspect, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, they're much better in the weight room and much better on the field?
I spend the majority of time with everyone getting them there for, because that's the biggest rock in almost all cases. Like in the odds, like if a bodybuilder came to me 6 to 8 weeks out from a competition and they were already in pretty good shape, and they just need to I don't really care how you do on one leg, or single leg RDL, or walking lunges or things like that. But if you have a goal that's not so compressed by time that we need to really do away with any extraneous adaptations, 99% of people, I'm looking there first, because it's our most efficient adaptation. Because it's something that once I teach you how to do it, you know it for good, right? But putting on muscle is inefficient. Like if I don't train for a week, I'll lose, 10 pounds, 12 pounds, right? Because my body's like, oh, thank God, we're going to jettison all this useless tissue and use our caloric resources for other bodily processes.
Man, proprioception is a hell of a drug.
Proprioception, yes, that's the PED.
Yeah, because and it's that honestly blows my mind, because I think of gaining proprioception by working through a range of motion, but really what you're doing is you're only flexing what you already know.
Yeah.
You know, you're not coming at it what you don't know, what your muscles don't know, right. And that is stability stuff. And I guess in my position, it's kind of like I was a little bit nose blind to it. Like I couldn't smell the fact that I wasn't working on stability with athletes, because my sport is so stability based. Yeah. Olympic weightlifting, it's like this is your zone.
Yeah.
And this is a tough zone for a lot of people to be in. Like my hands over my head, like being here, that's like where we need to be always. So it's just like, get good at here. And that's just stability. So then what we have to do is work on the strength aspect. Most of the times, a lot of the times, we find the technique first, and then we go, okay, you need to get stronger. Because like there has to be some sort of way to move the needle, and that's force production. Yeah. And so sometimes when people don't have that stability and they don't have the built up technique, if you just work on strength, you're missing out on something. I guess now that I think about it, when you teach someone how to weightlift just with a barbell, you're teaching them stability first, which is awesome. And then you can work on strength. So you actually start with the stability base. But I work with jiu-jitsu guys, right? And I'm not going to teach them how to snatch and clean and jerk, because it is a time sink, but we're also going to, I have other ways that I want to work with them, and it's a really skillful thing, but I need to figure out other ways to work on stability, not first, but like as much as I do strength. And it's totally a self-check for me, because I have not looked at it that way.
I think the biggest factor, especially if you're dealing with fighting athletes, and or combat sport athletes at large, but it's a common comparison that I'll make all the time, is like, I'm not well versed in anything other than like a street fight. So any jiu-jitsu crap, if anyone knows anything and they catch me in a bathrobe, they start pulling on or whatever, like, okay, like if I can't punch someone in the face, I don't have a very good time with fighting. Right. And I have friends who are, high level, like UFC, mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu, black belt, the whole 9 yards. And they're much smaller than I am. They're much weaker than I am. And they make this misstep. And again, it's in the language. And I correct them every time. They go, I can use your strength against you. Like, no, you can't. You can't. I grab you by your bathrobe, I'll throw you out. Not you. You're so deceivingly large in person. Me and my buddy James were talking about this on the way here. But these are my friends that are like 5'8" and they're like 150 pounds and they're killers.
Yeah.
They're like, I'll use your strength against you. It's like, no. Correction. You'll use my center of mass against me.
Yeah.
Right. So controlling center of mass is a component of stability. Right. So stability is center of mass and its relationship to the base of support. So being able to control center of mass is really like the fundamental prerequisite to motor learning. So what makes an athlete, like a combat sport athlete, especially Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, so dangerous is they have established the prerequisite to motor learning. And now not only can they influence and control their center of mass, they can influence and control someone else's, right? It's like if you ever read the Bobby Waitskin's Art of Learning, that book where he goes from like the chess master to the push hands Tai Chi, he kind of explains this without really knowing he's explaining it. Like that push hands Tai Chi is all about controlling center of mass, which in order to control someone else's, you have to be able to control your own. And that's a really good framework for people to base their training off of, is first understanding like, hey, am I working with someone who is capable, is strong enough to control their own center of mass? Because there are some people who are weaker than the forces of gravity acting on them. And for someone who's always been on the leading edge of strength to body weight, like I've been playing sports my whole life and in the gym, it can be hard to physically empathize with someone who's not at that level. Like, so many people get into fitness and weight training well into their like 30s and 40s and never been to a gym before. And I find the industry at large, especially when you kind of adopt this concept, it's like, it's very contextual, because someone might need a leg press, right? They might need a leg press to just get on the board. Yeah. Right. Like back squatting for a new client. Like if someone walks in and they're untrained and they're overweight, we can assume that their center of mass is forward, right? They have their feet broadened out, like they're flared out. They have like they're extending their lumbar spine. They have this like hyperlordotic posture or however you want to designate it. But what they're doing, their nervous system is trying to pull their center of mass back into a broader base support, trying to make them more stable, right? So it's like when people are relatively detrained, I make this comparison. It's like, you ever played chess?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But chess and checkers are roughly played on the same board, right? It's like black squares and white squares, but that's like the gym, right? Depending on whether or not your client or whoever you're working with is strong enough to control their center of mass, or are stronger than the forces of gravity acting on them, it's going to decide what board you're playing on or what pieces you're playing on, because you're playing on the same board. Because with people who are weaker than the forces of gravity acting on them, you just want to make little jumps like checkers, right? But once we can get to a point where they can control their center of mass, like, okay, now these pieces have more complicated orientations, right?
So with the martial artists that I've worked with, they're world level jiu-jitsu players, and one of them now is in the MMA. His name's Cody Steele. But with these guys, they are absolutely in control of their own center of mass, and their whole sport is based off of leverage. So it's like, how can I control someone else's center of mass? A lot of times from being underneath them, things like that. But what I simplified my mission, and I said, okay, whatever amount of force you can produce to put into someone else, I want you to produce more. So I just got them stronger. And I think and that is a case of, because these guys are, their proprioception is there, their stability for the most part is there. Like they can walk on their hands, and so they can walk on their hands, they can do backflips, like seriously. So these are the guys where it's like, okay, well, if you get around someone's waist and you get a gable grip, like I want you to be able to manage them. And the stronger you are, the more fitness you'll have to put in force in the ground. The more you can manipulate your own body weight on your back, like if we put your body weight on your back and you do it for a set of 20, okay, so every effort that you do to now lift someone and move them is less. And if you want to make a hard effort, you can go harder. So with that in mind, there's a lot, and that is directly to combat this idea of it's a term that I've come up with. It's called weaponized specificity. So a lot of people.
I have a term. Go. Right. I have a term for this. Go ahead.
So a lot of people, like I call them like functional coaches, functional gurus. They'll continue to move the goalpost away from whatever your methodology is, because they have the new subset of methodology that is good. So I can be like, look, I just got one of my athletes, like we do this test. We do pull-ups, we do back squat, body weight, how many reps can you do, bench press, body weight, or how many reps can you do, like fun stuff like that actually works. But they think it's dumb. They think it's not specific to martial arts. This is bodybuilding, strength training, bullshit. You're making your guys more dysfunctional, and then it'll be like, okay, we'll have them do this, like bird dog holding this weight. See, there's the dysfunction. They continue to move, and that's what I call the weaponized specificity. For instance, if I've seen a lot of this, like, let's say there's a guard called X guard, and you can like swing your legs and then put them into X guard.
Okay, yeah, I follow.
And one of these functional coaches would put bands around the leg so there's resistance. And now we are resisting a specific action. And that's what they deem as good training for your sport, is resisting the actual specific thing. They're always the first people to say, when are they going to lay down and press, or when are they going to back squat? It's not specific. It's not specific. It's not specific. And I continually say, it's like the likelihood that they're going to produce more force based off of a higher back squat, an increased back squat, it's proven. Time and time again, it's proven. I don't need to bring them in here and have them do more of what they do on the mats. Yeah. Not only that, they're gonna go crazy. Some of my workouts, and I'm gonna end it here. I'm gonna send it to you because I know you're chomping at the bit. Some of my workouts we'll do like a quick warm up, get the blood flowing, and we'll back squat for 40 minutes.
Sick.
And then we'll do like some lunges. This will be like a lower body day. Some lunges, some RDLs, maybe some like banded hamstring curls, and they'll leave. Yeah. And it's an hour to an hour 15 max. Okay, that is it. That's all the whole workout is. And they got stronger, they got better, and now they're out of there. They're not thinking about the weight room. They're going back on the mats training. I don't want to do anything more than that. I don't want to do anything less than that.
There's a roboticist back in like the 70s who came up with this theory, or this principle, called the uncanny valley. I think is really pertinent. And of all sports that I've worked in, the functional guru conundrum that you're running into is probably most prevalent in combat sports.
Yes.
Like arm barring a kettlebell or some shit. Like, what are we doing here, right? Or I love, one of my favorites is the landmine punch. Mm-hmm. Who are you fighting? This person is out of your weight class. Certainly, if you're punching up here, you should not be in a ring with this person. Like, are you fighting giants? Are you David versus Goliath? So it's funny to see the principle fall on its head, but there's this idea in robotics that I've kind of like adapted to strength training. And the theory is called the uncanny valley, which is basically, it's a graph that plots our likeness for an animation versus the animation. So I guess our likeness for animation would be on the y-axis, and the likeness of that animation to us. So on running along the x-axis, we have an increasing likeness to us, which means it looks more and more like us. And then on the y-axis, we have, do we respond positively to this or negatively to this? So like, I'll kind of plot these. So like Wall-E would be one that kind of ranks kind of low, because it's like, we don't really care. It's a microwave on Mars that kind of beeps and boops or whatever but it's like anthropomorphized to a certain degree, right? So it's not really like us, and we don't really like it that much, whatever. But then you take a step up and make things a little bit more like us, and we like it more. Minions, holy people love Minions. Like but still they're yellow things, ill-defined, with one guy's got one eye and they wear the suspenders and shit. So we like them way more than Wall-E. If you took a straw poll, you'd be like, yo, Minions or Wall-E? Like, Wall-E, I hope he dies on Mars or whatever. Like Minions to the death. And then you see things like Simpsons and Family Guy, like, been around for 25, 30 years. More anthropomorphized than Minions, right? But Marge still has like 4-foot blue hair. Like, it's not really tenable. You're not going to mistake them for a person. And then you get into like a weird like drop-off area of like, I don't know. You ever see like Polar Express is one that comes to
creepy.
Mind? Yeah, yes. Right. It's like it's too Tom much. Hanks, but
they
it's
went
not.
Too far.
They're falling in the uncanny valley, and then you see something like the movie Ex Machina. You ever seen that? Mm-hmm. Where like it's a robot, the face, but like the back of her is all like glass and computers. Yep. You're like, whoa. It's more like us along that x-axis, and then we drop into the bottom of that valley. So we're plotting like Wall-E, Minions, Simpsons, Polar Express, ex machina. And then all of a sudden, and the best part about this graph is that it upticks to real human beings. Right, because we really like human beings, right? COVID, like, oh my God, people's faces. We love people more. So that's like the capstone to this graph is like the most like us. They use
this for horror as well. So
interesting.
Yeah, so if you can, like, the really scary horror things are things that look human but have a little bit off.
Interesting.
Very human, but a little bit off. Like their eyes are just a little bit bigger. Their mouth is just a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that'll do it.
The more that they look not unhuman, that might be less scary. The too human that they look, they're not as like paranormal.
Yeah.
You know.
Interesting. Yeah, like a John Wayne Gacy character is not that. He looks like your fucking neighbor.
So how it then does this relate back to functional?
So let's think of exercises, right? Like there's general physical properties that we can get close to in the domain of the weight room. So it's like, you know, does a hammer curl look much like something in sports? Like, I don't know, maybe we flex our elbows, but that's kind of like, well, that's like Wally, right? And then, you know, is like a leg press or a lying hamstring curl. It's like, I don't know, maybe that's like a little bit further along the spectrum, more likable and more like, and then you get something like back squats and all that. But then when you're attaching the end of your broken Titleist to a cable stack and working on your follow through, it's like, whoa, we've fallen. It looks too much like the thing we're trying to get better at. And from a physiological like adaptation perspective, if I load up a cable follow through with my 9-iron, I'm going to change the way I actually recruit and have a negative impact, right? I'm going to overuse, in this case, like, I don't know, I'll probably overuse my lats as a trunk rotator rather than my obliques. I'll probably overload my adductors rather than my glutes. So it's going to change the actual dynamics of how I swing a club, right? So it falls off precipitously from our big rocks that are not necessarily like one-to-one of what we're looking at. And then at the uptick is the sport itself, kind of like you alluded to.
My goal is not specific. The moment you walk into a weight room, it is non-specific.
Yeah.
Now, there are needs that are specific, but they can still hold to the general physical preparedness. That's what I continually say to these people that continue to move the goalpost. They keep saying this, you know, and of course, martial arts is like the snootiest people when it comes to this. There is one guy, he does soccer stuff, and he is so anti-weight room. He is so unbelievably anti-weight room. And there's these guys, the GOTA guys, they'll actually show people tearing their ACL and saying that they were doing typical weight room training. It's definitely out there and it exists a lot. And I'm not done ripping on these people because
I could go in on GOTA.
Yeah, it's such. Look, my thing about charlatans. GOTA and Joel Seedman were my first two exposures to people being like angry, and then I had to break down what exactly it is that made me angry about them. And they follow this playbook, this charlatans playbook. In order for them to exist, the outgroup cannot. So as much as they promote, they must attack. So if they are to promote GOTA, they have to attack what's the normal thing. Which is crazy to me, right? Because some of the stuff they talk about, I really, really like. Like, you know, dysfunction, you can watch someone's feet and you can say, we were talking about it earlier, someone's feet, if they're collapsed in and it's because they have dysfunction in their feet, you know, they need to work on pronation of the foot and they need to work on their arches and they need to work on their ability to control their knee and how it goes over their toe and a lot of different things. I love that. And I teach a lot of stuff like that. And I will teach a lot of stuff that GOTA uses. But I will also try to move the needle as far as force production goes with certified, you know, bona fide movements that have been proven time and time again. The back squat, the deadlift, the front squat, overhead squat, press, what you name it. I'm going to use those things as well. The thing is, GOTA drew the line in the sand. And Joel Seedman drew the line in the sand. And they said, anyone who does this is teaching dysfunction, is teaching people how to injure themselves. And so from that point forward, if you're going to do that, if you're going to come at me like that, I'm going to go back at you. Right? Because this is what I do. And I know it works. And other people know it works. You know, you can't just reinvent the wheel and say that anything before that was like bullshit.
I think the hard part is there's no There's no standardized definition of function. Like,
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
keep
I would
moving the
operate.
goalpost.
I think we could all agree that function is how the human organism behaves when it walks and breathes. Not necessarily in that order. I would say ventilation mechanics are probably more primary to locomotion mechanics, but they're inextricable to a certain degree. Like, I think that. So if we want to play that game and go, okay, something is dysfunctional, does it fly in the face of how ventilation mechanics or locomotion mechanics acts out in the body at like the musculoskeletal level? If yes, then yeah, we could say it's dysfunctional. But then it's like the devil's in the dosage, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like,
The dose makes the poison.
right. Like a bench press, a competition style bench press, I would say is dysfunctional, because if we're trying to retract the scaps, and scapular retraction of the bench press is like a whole nother dumb argument that people don't know how to contextualize. Like if you're Emily Hu and you're 113 pounds and you're benching 298 pounds, I'm not really worried about your scapula moving because your arm is barely moving.
Yeah.
Right. Because Emily's
Range of
bench
motion.
stroke is
Yeah.
that much. So it's like, okay, if scapular humeral rhythm is a thing, which is not the 2-to-1 ratio that everyone thinks it is, it has more to do with the position of the humerus relative to the scapula and the full arc of 180-degree movement. And we're only working in a weird 90-degree range and only for 3 inches anyhow. So who gives a fuck about the scapula? It's probably not moving. I would say, yeah, that's going to fly in the face of how the scapula is meant to upwardly rotate in gait mechanics and ventilation, right? Like we need to upwardly rotate the scaps to create posterior expansion to actually breathe through our fucking lungs. So that you could say is dysfunctional, but like you said, the devil's, I mean, I say devil's in the dosage. Dose dictates the poison.
The dose makes the poison. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, yeah, but if someone does that 2 or 3 times a week, what's the total? There's 168 hours in a week. Times that by 60 minutes in an hour, times that by 60 seconds a minute. And it's like, does it matter? Like it's a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of existence. And the thing about the better the athlete, the more you can do, honestly, like whatever the fuck you want. Because, and that's one of the best parts of my job now, is because what defines a good athlete is their ability to learn motor skills quickly. Like, and I have to explain this, and I have to remind myself this sometimes, that when I worked with a guy, dude, yesterday is probably on like a $15-16 million contract, a football guy. And he's a guy, like he's crazy fast. And like, I'm trying to explain to him, like we go through, is I need to find the limit. I need to find the limit of your current capacity of motor skills. Because if I'm to look at muscles like sensory organs, I need to train them at the outer layers or at the outer borders of your skill set. Right. So I'm adding layers of complexity to movement to find out where we need to work at. Right. Just like if I was adding weight to a bar. Right. If I was adding weight to a bar, it's like if I give you a 135-pound bench press, it's like, well, it's probably not going to do too much, right? Because you can bench way more than that. So it's the same thing with like trying to train muscles, not from a hypertrophy response, but from a sensory response. I need to start layering or adding layers of complexity. And I got to tell them, I'm like, look, man, because they'll get frustrated when we find the wall, right? And I'm like, look, the progression you just went through takes most mortals like 6 months, and you did it in 6 reps. Right. So it's like really what defines an athlete is their ability to acquire, or really their ability to learn.
And so that's where I already understand, like when I train these high level athletes, it's already a known thing between us. Like, right, you know how to move, you know how to learn, you've proved it time and time again. So what I'm going to try and do is get you fitter. And it's a tough term to use, fit and fitness, because I want you to be able to do more without knowing that you're doing more, because we can't get you on the mats more than you are. You're already on the mats 4 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. So in between here, like I want you to be able to obviously, you know, the more power I can give you, the better. But I think about someone like Dante Culpepper. You remember him?
Of course.
Okay.
What a reference.
Do I want to make him stronger?
I think he's good.
I think he's pretty good.
He's good.
So what do I do with him? What do you do with a guy who is already strong enough?
Is this a question?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to wind the clocks back like 10 years ago. You could get away with like referencing biomechanics as a part of your job description, and people are like, get a load of this motherfucker. Biomechanics. That sounds fancy. Then like 5 years ago, the industry kind of came around and was like, what's biomechanics? And then they defined it. And people were like, well, biomechanics is load management. And that like appeased the masses for a little bit, but I still don't agree that is encompassing of what biomechanics as a practice is. So it's like, well, biomechanics is load management either means one or two things to someone, depending on where their vantage point is at. It means load management in the sense of like progressive overload, right? We're going to, 2.5 pounds every session or whatever the hell people do. Or from a rehab setting, it can be like doing less, but both are true, right? Load management is figuring out, okay, in this, in a high level athlete jiu-jitsu setting where they're under an incredible amount of fatigue and stress, how do I minimize that? And like the number one thing that I try to, not really try, I don't think it's hard, but the number one thing that I stress to trainers and coaches and therapists is getting this word out of your parlance. It's, oh, we're just going to go light today, because that's a poison, I think, because what I think of biomechanics, I think of, yes, biomechanics is load management through the vehicle of exercise selection. So we talked earlier about like, the big rocks we can turn over in different disciplines, whether it's rehab, whether it's speed development, whether it's muscle building, whether it's any number of adaptations that we could be striving for in a physical setting. And what I look at is like, okay, I have an index of exercises in my brain, and I can query that exercise like on some chat GPT shit, and I can query it very quickly and then be able to organize these exercises in a way that's rank ordered and filtered, same way you'd like look for Airbnbs, right? I travel a lot, so I know that the most Airbnbs in a single city in the world is London. Airbnb has 6 million units for rent in the world, and there's 56 to 60,000 units in the city of London alone. That's a lot to filter through, but it's like, I don't know, there's probably 60,000 different exercises you could do, right? Without a doubt. So I need to be able to query that with filtering criteria, and Airbnb is a great example. It's like, okay, well, maybe I want to stay in Hyde Park. Okay, that 60,000 is now down to like, I don't know,
5,000.
5,000, sure, whatever. And well, I need Wi-Fi because this. So maybe that knocks down like 3. Maybe there's 3 places in Hyde Park that don't have Wi-Fi. I don't care what part of the year it is. I need air conditioning. And it's like, well, there's a lot of really old buildings there that might not have air conditioning. Right. So maybe that 5,000 is down to like 2,500. And then I'm speaking at some event center or something, and so I would need to be in a proximity of this. And so I just keep querying that and filtering that criteria, that index, until I'm left with like very few exercises, right? Or until I'm left with very few options. So use the example of a phone book. And this is where like a principles-based approach really helps in the face of protocols-based approaches. So Talender, your last name. So it's the 17th letter of a 26-letter alphabet. It's roughly 72% of the way through the alphabet, give or take. So if I were to look you up in the phone book, I would first, and phone books for those of you listening, so George, no, you. So phone books are this thing that like people used to drop off like on bikes and like put it on your doorstep. It has all the phone numbers of people. You've seen one in a museum once? Okay. So phone books, the first thing I'd have to make sure is I'm looking in the right index, like white pages versus yellow pages. Like I'm not gonna be able to find, I don't know, maybe like Talender Industries in the yellow pages. Right. But if I'm looking for you as a person, I need to know white pages, right? So then I go to T. I don't open up to the first page and go, no Talender. And then go to like B and go, no Talender. I go in my mind, and we all do this, and maybe some of us know the math and some of us don't. I think, all right, 17 out of 26, 72-ish%, whatever it is. And I'm going to look at a book like this, and I'm just going to go, well, half is 50%, and then half of half is 75. And that's how I'm going to open.
Right around there. Yeah.
Right. So like with a good assessment, what I'm going to think about is like, all right, what is either the loadability or the complexity that this person can handle, and what is their end goal? And as I'm asking them questions, I'm literally like filtering that query, filtering that entire index in my brain, and just kind of like flipping through the pages. And as they say, like, oh yeah, I tore my ACL 3 years ago, and then that removes a bunch of exercises and brings some exercises in. And it's so like
the with a guy like Dante Culpepper, and that's just because growing up for me, seeing him on the Panthers, I'm like, I don't know that I can't think of a more specimened human. 6'8", 300 pounds, ran a 4.5.
Is that good? Yeah, that's insane.
Scariest individual ever. Like, so for him, like being that strong, all of a sudden you have to go through that Rolodex and determine all of these different things. And I guess, time of year, goal, whatever. It's just there's too many variables to determine. But I think like if we could narrow it to like, okay, we're not getting him stronger. Let's say it's 8 weeks out from season and they're training really hard. It's almost too late then even to work because their training load is super high, right? Like camp and like that. Like you don't want to be working on strength in camp because the adaptation is just too much. So it's weird. It's almost like football players, like there's very few times where you actually want to drive adaptation. Like
high school.
Yeah.
Right. Like in a season, in a calendar year.
Yeah.
I think what you can do is the pursuit of getting stronger is depreciating on the mechanics that it requires to get stronger.
Right.
So like, let's pull on this thread for a while because this is my literally every day of my life. So like, if you keep back squatting super, super heavy, like we go to a powerlifting meet and you go in the warm up room and it's just like a bunch of dudes with like, they're kind of CPAPs and their feet are facing either side of them. They're kind of like waddling about. It's like, well, they ended up that way as a consequence of becoming really strong, right? But it's almost like I had these cars when I was a kid that I would just sit there for hours and just pull it back, and it was on a little spring, and then I would let it go, and it would phew, and it would just like go to the other side, and I would grab it, and I would bring it back, and I pull it. The gym, especially in like a field sport or really any sport, I don't want to say sport specific training, but I think that people will get the reference. The gym is about pulling them back. Yeah. So on the field, they go forward, right? So like, let's say use back squat for example, and we're working on, there's like Terrell Suggs, or there's I don't know, Harrison who's pushing like 1,000-pound sleds. It's like, okay, I don't want him to push a 500-pound sled if he can push a 1,000-pound sled. But I know the physical properties that are likely going to be adopted by someone who pushes that. Like he's going to have probably a crazy like bilateral external rotation of his rib cage, and he's going to be lacking internal rotation of his hips. He's going to need to reverse both of those to be able to produce the force he has. He's going to have to take this car that can end up over here, but the only way it can end up over here is if I pull it back. Mm-hmm. So it's like, all right, well, how can we manipulate our loading parameters and lifting positions to help promote him improving his internal rotation, his frontal plane movement of the pelvis and things like that. So I don't want to say there's a level of like specificity per our conversation earlier, specific to the sport.
No, but it's specific to the individual in that you have to select exercise. So you actually almost circumvent load management entirely, and you're like exercise selection, exercise selection, exercise selection.
But when the people it self-selects for people who need more loadable exercises, right? Like if I have guys, we have 3 kids right now running in the 4.2s that'll go to Indianapolis, and like the 2 kids from Cincinnati and a kid from Princeton are running in the 4.2s right now. And there's just, one kid was a heptathlete, 4-year heptathlete, and then also a wide receiver.
What?
Right. So it's like, and they all have different presentations. Like he's pretty big. I'm not going to name his name, but I'm sure anyone can figure it out. But some of the guys are smaller. So some of the guys, the only way they're going to run faster is if they get stronger, right? But so when you're looking at like their presentation, it's like if someone has internal rotation of the hips is probably one of the biggest things that I look at, which essentially internal rotation of the hip is a proxy for how your body controls its center of mass on one leg, which guess what? If you're playing football, that's how you make your money, controlling your center of mass on one leg.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and this doubles back to like the conversation we had earlier about strength and stability. I'll walk into any college or pro weight room in the world, honestly, at this point, and there'll be glute strengthening, right? And I'll try and teach the difference between stability and strength. And it's like, look, you can put bands around your knees all day, but when you're running down the sidelines and someone's trying to tackle you, you're not going to try and abduct your non-weight bearing hip and kick the person away. You're going to want to resist force on your stance leg to be able to win this hand battle, or to be able to come in like David Henry and just punch someone in the face with like the meanest stiff arm ever. That stiff arm was made at the opposite hip, right? So it's like, that right there is like for someone who's maybe a bit bigger that wants to get faster. It's like, let's make you more stable. Well, if you're bigger and stronger, the stability exercise will manage load away from your strength and pull you down. But if you're someone who's moves really well and has access to that IR, it's like, well, great. Those people are usually really stable, but they're not as strong. So I don't need to do the stability thing. I need to put a bar on their back.
Yeah.
Right. So that it's such a good, and I don't want to say divergent as if it's binary, like 1 or 0, but it does, especially at the pro level, there does seem to be like 2 structural archetypes that we're going to see. And so there's shades of gray in between, but really good players are are either built for their sport or just amazing compensators.
Without naming names, who like have you worked with someone who is like incredibly high level athlete who just has what you would consider, I don't even know if the right word is dysfunction, but somebody who's like, I don't even know how you do this. Your movement in the weight room and everything is horrible.
Yeah,
have you worked with someone like that?
He was the fastest combine 40 2 years ago. He's a DN defensive back for the Green Bay Packers. His name's Eric Stokes.
Yeah.
He's Eric Stokes went to Georgia. He's a dog. And he ran track and field and played football. He tore both hamstrings and ran a 10-3 100 on 2 torn hamstrings.
And he just, the way that he moves, you're
I tell this guy to do a lunge. So here's the thing. There's three tenets of progression when it comes to load or speed or endurance or whatever. There's endurance or time. There's intensity and load, and then there's velocity and speed. In that order too. So like if I'm teaching a plane of movement, or I'm teaching an exercise in a plane of movement, I'm going to layer those 3 things on, and I'm going to look at the planes of movement as there's a sagittal plane, there's frontal plane, the transverse plane. But then as we layer progressions within each plane, it's always going to be endurance first, intensity second, and velocity third. So most of the time, it's not going to get better, right? Like if it's not working out at like low endurance, it's not going to work out at high endurance, and it's not going to work out at low intensity or high intensity. Right. And it's definitely not going to work out at low velocity and then ultimately high velocity.
So like it wasn't working out at low.
Dude, I did walking lunges with this guy, and he would move the same arm with the same hip. So he would like be Franken lunging down the thing, but somehow, dude, like I'll sit back sometimes and just watch his 40 run, 4.23 at 198 pounds. 6'2". Stokes is one of the most phenomenal, like just figure it out runners I've ever seen. Like raw speed. I think the only other guy that comes to mind that has that raw speed that I've seen is Robbie Anderson.
So my old mentor when I was in strength and conditioning at Northwestern, he was like, dude, sometimes I think we don't do anything. Sometimes sometimes I see like that example, and I'm like, do we even really help? Does it really even matter? You know, like
he's just so nihilistic.
Does that not happen to you? Like, so there was the Alabama strength coach, and I there's a really funny clip of him like talking absolute complete nonsense in at some seminar, just like, we power clean because it's power clean are good, and like that. And he's just a motivator, and he's just a screamer, and he's a yeller. He's a football guy. He was like the first guy to make $1 million as a strength coach, and Alabama won like national championship after national championship after national championship. And we watched that together, and he's like, man, I don't even like strength and conditioning, like just doesn't, it's like we can't quantify what is good and what is bad, because this guy wins national championships by every metric, by every single one. He is the best strength coach, right? But he also, it's because he works with freaks, like the freaks, and not only that, they can get injured, and there's another freak that piles in behind.
Back to the warehouse.
But do you ever get that feeling, that like nihilist feeling, and then you just kind of have to like push it away and work?
I did for a really long time, but I think what helps is just looking at those guys and be like, what can I learn? Right? Like maybe I'm not the best motivator, right? Like, and it's hard to be like super technically savvy and granular at the level of detail and be a good motivator. So I look at a guy like that, and before I'd be like, yo, this guy's making a sheet a year, like that, like, you know, can you even spell Verkhoshansky? Like, you. Yeah. But then it's like, well, all right, I'm not, you know, making $1 million. I don't work for that. So he's doing something right that I'm not doing. Yeah. And I think that's where, like, and I get it, man. Like if you're not making bread, like it can be really frustrating to see someone like that, because you invest so much time. But it's like when you see the outcome, like the outcome is not even, it's not even 40 times at the end of the day. Like sprinting will provide you an interesting adaptation or potential for adaptation, but like, I don't know, I have GPS on my guys every week. Like how many times guys are hitting 90% and above in max velocity is very rare. Right. Yeah. So I have to run them throughout
Jerry
the week.
Rice never had to. And Jerry Rice, what did he run, a 4.6?
Yeah. He's a big
really
body
slow.
too.
Really slow.
But
4.6
it's like,
for a starting wideout is unheard of slow. And he's the greatest of all time.
And that's him at his fastest in open field in a combine setting, right?
Exactly.
So you're not going to touch that in a game, right? Like unless you get some...
I heard Wayne Gretzky just like hid in the weight room. I heard he didn't do anything in the weight room.
Yeah, I mean, the more the skill of the sport is the preeminent factor, the less weight training I mean, have a big engine, like if you're Wayne or
right, yeah.
But I mean, you want to talk cerebral, like Wayne Gretzky had 3 hockey sticks for every game. Every period his stick was about a half inch shorter, so it kept him engaged in the game because he had to stay lower to the ice when he was tired. Like that's the 4D chess that these guys play at, right? Like if you're not looking at, like, it's almost like Moneyball, like that Oakland Athletics movie with Jonah Hill based on the true story. It's like, that's the real stuff. Like for me, like one of my biggest factors in load management is if especially with our pro guys coming in, if the music is loud and it's the best, I don't know if it's Lil Durk or if it's the Baby or something, and they're not dancing in between sets, that tells me more information than a force plate or a Nord board or anything. It's like, you're making 20 million, you're 23 years old, and you just bought your 4th Urus. You have a lot to dance about, my friend. And if you're not dancing, it's like, all right, we're going to shut it down. Like there's intangibles to sport that you can make tangibles if you pay attention. The thing is, you have to standardize all these other variables first for those to then be apparent to you. Right? Especially if you're like a self-aware, if you're like just an unconscious asleep at the wheel, like, yeah, football, like, thanks coach, I appreciate it, good luck out there, then whatever, just have your fun and make your money, and maybe one day the jig will be up, or maybe you'll just do that forever and be successful. But if you're like diligent and you want to get into the research and you want to do all that, it's like, your job's not over. That now your job begins. You've checked. Yeah. You have a series of checks and balances that you standardize your approach. So then you can start to be more in tune with the stuff that matters.
So I talk about this quite a bit with people in the strength and conditioning world. It's like one of the fears that I have is someone up.
Sure.
And the number one person I always think of is like Steph Curry. So it's like, okay, so Steph Curry comes to me for strength and conditioning. It's like, I don't know what I'm going to do to change you, because I don't want to change you at all. I don't want to, like, does he get injured? Has he been injured? I don't think he gets injured much.
No, he's not a big guy either.
So and then also his jump shot is perfect. The way that he plays is pretty good. I don't want to, it's like, what do we need to do? So in your instance, like, what do you do with somebody who is already successful and has already proven what they're doing is working? What do you do?
I try and look downstream at the tissues they're loading most consistently, and then it's a predictive game. Honestly, I've leaned more towards like big amounts of data over my career to kind of moneyball it. So I mean, I have about 25 years of statistics, just going back through like research and stuff on every position in the sport of football primarily. So a lot of my approach when I deal with clean slates, which is rare, like it's rare to have someone who doesn't have like an ankle or a knee or a collarbone or an AC joint or something like that. But I can tell you with like a certain level of, statistical accuracy, obviously, like there's so many facets to the game that it's not like you're reading a magic 8-ball, but like, I can tell you a DN third year, the likelihood of succumbing to this frequent injury, which is like an injury that'll happen to a lot of people that doesn't have you miss too many games, and then injury of high magnitude, which doesn't happen to as many people, but the man game's lost is high because you're out for an entire season.
So you're preventative, you're
future-proof.
You're going downstream with it.
Yeah.
And I also thought like it's impossible to have a clean slate. Like even Steph Curry, I'm sure there's something going on where he would like,
he's rolled an ankle,
and he can come to you and tell you what he wants. Like some of these athletes, like, they just want to be told what to do and what to work on, but they can say what they want to work on, and you can listen to that. I think just because you're the professional and you're the mind behind it doesn't mean that you have to say, shut up, dumb athlete. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? I think it's important, and I'm sure the opposite happens where like the opposite happens where the athlete comes to you thinking they know what they want, they know what they need, and you have to kind of slow them down. But like, I'm sure you have to balance both of those things. I'll
never slow an athlete down. I only tell people to shut up when it's general population.
Right.
Because that's my big thing in the sand. Like, someone comes in like, I think I need to get like Graston on my traps. And I look up at my diplomas and I go, oh no, that's my name. Shut up.
Yeah, right.
I don't deal with general population much anymore. Yeah. But when an athlete comes in, it's like, in order to know like someone's body, you have to know the body first in a lot of cases. But they are such outliers that their body is not the body, right? Like, someone doing a Franken lunge in the gym, it's like, most people in commercial gyms might be lunging like Stokes was. But I'm going to be like, hey, maybe you should like, contralateral shoulder, hip, all that stuff. like walk like a biped ambulatory person, walk the way we've evolved to walk over the last like 1.3 like billion years, or whatever the number is. And but if Stokes goes out like, oh wow, okay, I mean, maybe he'll get a little bit better if you can figure that out at low. But I take with much more deference. I take much more of the input of someone, because the number of times I've heard someone go, man, I just felt like something wasn't right. Like, so let's kind of go back to that idea of like muscles are sensory organs. Well, if they're that good of athlete and they feel something, the acuity of that feeling is so high resolution, right? That's going to carry more weight, where it's like, it's so lo-fi, where someone like, who doesn't really train or isn't like one of the best athletes in the world comes in and goes like, oh, I feel this. It's like,
you don't know what you,
you don't know the difference.
You can't make that assessment.
Like
I say that quite a bit. Greg Doucette just made a video saying you don't have to do the back squat, bench, and deadlift, which I agree with. You don't have to. But one of the points that he continually made was, if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. Or if it doesn't feel good, you don't have to do it. And the biggest issue I have is people cannot properly assess, untrained people cannot properly assess whether they feel good when they do a movement or if they like the movement, because they have not fully expressed what it means to do that movement the proper way. And they haven't done it enough. They haven't tried it in enough ways. The example I use is somebody comes in, wants to do a back squat, puts 60 kilos on the bar or 135 on the bar, and they get this awkward like half squat where they're really arching and it just feels weird and their legs aren't getting a pump. So that then they get on a hack squat or they get on a leg press and they go, wow, I just killed my legs. Why would I do a back squat? And that is the assessment that comes out of Greg Doucette, what he said. And so my thing was like, well, you never learned how to do the back squat properly in the first place. And so I think to bring it back to what you were saying is like the Gen Pop, like the more they tell you what they need, the less likelihood that it's actually what they need. And,
right.
And that's when you say shut up. But an athlete, you're saying their acuity, their understanding of their own body, it's because it's their profession. You do want to listen to that more often than not.
It's the checkers and chess pieces thing, right? Like, they're going to be, they're kings and knights and rooks and all that. They're those pieces on that board. So like they know how they move. Right, like the little horsey thing moves in an L shape on the one like, little fucking bowling pin thing moves on a diagonal. Like I don't know much about chess, but I know that. So they know how they move, right? Where it's like if people come in and they try and come in with these elaborate like, oh, something feels off, it doesn't feel right. It's like you're a checkers piece,
right?
You do this, right? Like it's so simple. Like your domain of competency when it comes to movement is so minimal that you don't know. Like you can't express. I kind of use this analogy where, if we look at muscles like sensory organs, and you use the word proprioception earlier in like a very accurate way, and I like that because proprioception is a coming together of two free nerve endings in the body, the Golgi tendon organ reflex and the muscle spindle, which I kind of talked about. And then mechanoreception plays a big role in that, not as fast to the brain. So we have proprioception, mechanoreception, and nociception. Those are three categories of peripheral inputs that go up to our brain and mix up with some other stuff that create like a motion capture image of our body in space, right? Like imagine playing, I don't know, what video game? Play video games? What do you play?
Fortnite.
What the is that?
Fortnite?
Okay, so let's say he was like a normal
GoldenEye.
child.
Did you play GoldenEye?
Yeah, all right. So imagine like Pierce Brosnan, like the GoldenEye before Daniel Craig. And the way they made that game was they went into a motion capture studio, right? Like mocap. So it's just like a bunch of little like ping pong balls. Yeah, like on the Lycra suit. Lord of the Rings.
That game was sick.
It's like Harry Potter with trees.
That game was awesome.
So Lord of the Rings. But so Andy Serkis, Gollum, he goes in there and puts all these ping pong balls on. And the athlete someone who has better proprioception and mechanoreception gets more stimulus into the brain, and it makes for an easier time for that image to be high resolution, right? So when we look at like an Andy Serkis, we compare him to like a high level athlete, when we look at like the CGI that they use to make that character, so many little transmitters, right? So many inputs into the CPU or the computer, comparison being so many inputs, trained inputs into our brain. Because like we can, if we have a high resolution motion capture image in our brain, we know where we are.
So would you say that an athlete has done more has had more motion capture and then has also had more inputs.
It has more inputs because they've done more. They've moved more,
right?
And because movement, like if we think of this,
and then they can be able to assess that because they have that proprioceptive image in their brain.
Yeah, so they can be more acute with like there's something wrong here because they have more sensation. Like this is really like eye opening to most people. Where do you know we don't have a receptor for wetness. Like if I poured that protein shake on your leg, you would know that your leg is wet, but we don't have a single nerve ending that triggers binary 0 to 1. Oh, this is liquid. It's like, you know how hex codes work with colors?
Yeah.
So like if I were to like grab the deepest blue from this little thing on the computer here,
you would get a hex code.
I would get a hex code, right? And it would be like a 6-digit number representing a level of each of the primary colors. And when you mix the levels of these primary colors together, you're going to get that particular color. And you can go anywhere in the world and you type in that hex code. So we have these 4 mechanoreceptors, which respond to deep pressure, light touch, skin stretch, and vibration. And so we kind of get a hex code stimulus input based off of different things. And we log it as, I'm in the shower. I know this is wet, but it's really just a certain amount of skin stretch, a certain amount of light touch, a certain amount of vibration, and a certain amount of deep. So we kind of, we're going to save this.
So this is the debate on is water wet?
Right. Wetness is
and sometimes people say it actually isn't.
It's not technically, but wetness is only it's almost like, is cyan pink? It's like, well, kind of, but it's on the spectrum of pink.
All these different.
Right. It's basically it's a plot along the electromagnetic spectrum is what pink is, right? Or cyan is. And it falls through where the borders of pink are. But let's think of this a step further. What are the most popular rehab tools that we see in the gym right now?
Probably bands, right? Or are you like
Theraguns, kinesio tape, foam rollers.
Yeah.
What did I say? The 4 mechanoreceptor stimulus: deep pressure, vibration, skin stretch, and light touch. So it's like, it's your Theragun's not breaking up scar tissue, but it is eliciting a primary free nerve ending that is exclusive mechanoreceptor to vibration.
Wow.
That's not nothing.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also moving at half the speed of our Golgi tendon organ and muscle spindle reflex. Right. So it's like, yeah, that stuff works kind of, but it doesn't work as good or as prioritized as much as these internal stimuli that we call proprioceptors.
Right.
So when people are Theragunning their quads, their hips, it's like, as long as the next thing is you elicit those internal reflexes and don't just do that, I'm sweet.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. All right. I think we're going to end it there.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Jordan, I appreciate you.
Thanks
coming
man.
on the show.
Thanks for letting me like yell about stuff I care about.
Yeah,
that's really I don't get to talk about that stuff at that level very often. So
that is
I appreciate
precisely
you're a facilitator.
I want people to do what they do on this show. People can find you at the Muscle Doc on Instagram. Also, you've got a bunch of other cool shit going on online.
Yeah, like all the education stuff is through company www.pre-script.com.
Prescript.
Yeah, so we do. I think we have 12 courses in our calendar this year. We're going to be in Singapore, we're going to be in Thailand in March. We're going to be in Seattle in June, May, and we're going to be in Toronto for our level 1 certification. It's all applied biomechanics.
Do you recommend people in strength and condition, any sort of anything like to come and check out Prescript?
Yeah, I mean, it's really more at the it's principles based. Yeah. So it's not protocols based. Like you're going to have to think a little bit. It's not like if this, then that, but yeah, it's what you just listened to times 100.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So if you guys are interested in that, check it out. Prescript and also the Muscle Doc on Instagram. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Jordan, for coming on. And that's it.